You don't have the traditional eating disorders. Like when you think of eating disorder, you think anorexia, bulimia,
Yes.
primarily.
That's exactly what I
Things
was
have
thinking.
changed, but
Yep.
it's what you think.
Yes.
When you don't have something like anorexia, there's not a lot of urgency in your healthcare.
No.
And so I found a doctor that was accepting new patients. I told her what was going on. And she said, how do you feel about upping your meds? She upped them to 20 milligrams and she referred me to an eating disorder clinic that rejected me because I didn't have anorexia. There's no inpatient treatment for binge eating disorder, period, in Canada. There are outpatient services available in 4 hospitals at that time across Canada, and none of them were in Toronto.
Hey there, besties, and welcome to our cozy corner of the podcasting world. It's time for another episode of Share a Latte. I'm Min, your virtual coffee bestie and host. Imagine us in a cozy cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the air, and ready to embark on an inspiring journey. In each episode, remarkable women share their stories of triumphs over life's challenges, providing a warm embrace for your soul. These tales remind you of resilience and determination are keys to success. So grab your favorite brew, get comfy, and join us for the conversation that will awaken your mind and heart. You'll discover your own power to turn tough times into incredible strengths. The Share a Latte podcast sprinkles hope and courage and the belief that you can not only handle, but thrive into your day. All right, besties, let's embrace those tales of triumph and get ready for another awesome episode of Share a Latte. Hey there, latte and podcast lovers. Thank you for pressing the play button and joining me here on Share a Latte. I'm brewing an inspiring story with Min Boekhorst, a resilient mental health advocate. For more than over a decade, Megan has navigated the twists and turns of mental illness, confronting depression and a binge eating disorder. These experiences not only shaped her personal narrative, but fueled her mission to change the conversation around mental health. In this inspiring coffee-fueled conversation, Megan opens up about her journey from recovering from her binge eating disorder and managing depression. But Megan is more than just a survivor. She's a mental health tarot card reader, a certified mental health first aid facilitator, a mental health coach, and a passionate advocate. Beyond the mic, Megan thrives in community building, creative chaos, and the company of her fur bum, Jefferson Smudge. So pour yourself that beautiful cup of coffee, settle in, and let's dive into an empowering coffee chat about mental health. Welcome back, friends. I am so excited. We have a very special guest on today. For those who don't know, I have a BC bestie, Megan, and Megan and I actually met through somebody else, but we definitely connected over a love for our own mental health, and we kind of have some parallels in our stories. Megan, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, so my name is Min Boekhorst. My pronouns are she, they. I am a gender fluid queerdo, as I like to say. And I have struggled with my mental health probably my whole life, if we're being honest, who hasn't? But it was in high school where I started showing signs of binge eating disorder. Of course, at that time, binge eating disorder wasn't even recognized by the DSM-5 or the DSM, I think 4 at that time. Might have been 3. I would have been, if I was diagnosed at that point, I would have been diagnosed with eating disorder not otherwise specified. Who cares about eating disorder not otherwise specified? It doesn't even care to get a name. As I transitioned into university, the signs of depression and anxiety also began to set in. With more freedom, it allowed my eating disorder to flourish. Having moved out of my parents' place, living on my own for the first time in a dorm. And so the first few years of university life, I really struggled to come to terms with this idea that I am living with mental illness, which means I can't run at 100% all the time. The idea of who I had, or the idea of what I was and who I was pre-mental illness, not only was it an illusion because mental health is something we all struggle with, but it was crushed. Ultimately, a lot of my symptoms and triggers stemmed from an abusive relationship in high school, so that played a huge role. But really the first early years of my 20s were about trying to learn how to not just survive with mental illness, but live with mental illness and actually have a life and
Mhm.
feel like I'm able to still participate fully in society. All these things I didn't have the language for back then. I didn't know what I was doing back then, but a few 10 years or so of doing this work, I finally figured it out. In my mid 20s, I started to get a really good handle on my mental illness. It was 2015 when I started publicly talking about my mental illness. I was first put on medication, I think, in 2013. Yeah, just after I worked at Lululemon. And then in 2019, I accidentally started a business about it.
I accidentally started a business. I love this.
It was a genuine accident. I didn't mean to.
I know. The thing is, I know this story, so we're going to dive deeper into that in a second. But did you have mental illness from, let's say, the age of 5 to the age of the minute you realized that you were struggling with something? Or was it like a light switch that went on?
Brain works differently at those ages, of
It
course.
does. Mm-hmm.
And the brain hadn't fully developed. I It's so funny how much we know about ourselves at a young age and yet how much there is still left to explore. For example, I always knew I was bisexual. I had to learn what straight was because that makes no sense to me. Why you're attracted to a person because of their gender just doesn't compute. Everybody's hot. But whereas my gender identity was something that didn't really come to me until my 30s. Yeah, I know, right?
Oh.
I
See,
just
I only know this side of you. So this already to me is shocking. So what do you mean that it didn't really come to you until your 30s? So
I
throughout high school and your 20s, you dated men. And then in your 30s, you were like, wait a second, I don't.
no, gender identity and sexuality, very different now, remember?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
My sexuality, I was always attracted to women, but I was growing up in a conservative town. I grew up in the Bible Belt of BC. I was not out. I'm actually laughing a lot because of the politics that are happening. And all these parents are saying that they know their kids. My parents and I, you know this, I have a fantastic relationship with my parents. You've met my parents, they're
Yes.
awesome.
Yes.
I can't say too much, otherwise it'll go to their head because, oh boy, do they have an ego when I tell them, remind them that they're great parents. But my parents were never the ones who said we always knew or we even suspected. Like when I came out to them, it was a really non-event because it was pretty much just like, I'm dating somebody. Her name is Chelsea. And they went, oh, what does that mean? I'm bi. Okay. But it was a surprise to them because they didn't see that coming because I always presented as very straight. And that was due to safety in my town. It was not safe for me to be queer in my town.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I never dated women. I was never very open with my attraction to women when I was a youth. Doesn't mean I didn't experiment, but it was something that I hid. Whereas my gender identity, I was growing up, I'm assigned female at birth.
Mm-hmm.
I still very much identify with being a woman. There's still a lot of aspects of womanhood and femininity that are very important to me.
Right.
But there was also, again, and it ties to the bisexuality. Seeing the gender divide just never really made sense to me. And it was our mutual friend who actually said something that triggered my question about my gender identity. They had said when they started their gender identity, they began using she, they pronouns as a way to say fuck you to the gender binary. And that's how my gender identity started. I went, I like that. The
Mm-hmm.
gender binary is stupid. Let's try that.
Yeah.
And then it felt really right. And then I started exploring it more. So, from a scientific standpoint, gender identity starts to form around the age of 5, 6, 7. That's when it solidifies. So, in our brains start to understand our gender identity, but we as people don't necessarily recognize our gender identity right away, always. And through questioning my gender identity and getting really curious about what gender means to me is how I came to a point of being comfortable within it. And it took experimentation, which was really interesting for me as somebody who was so certain in my sexuality, so confident in being bi, and proudly owning that label when it was safe for me to do, to struggle to find the term that worked for me with gender. I started out with my pronoun changes. I started using she, they. Nobody noticed. I didn't make it a thing. I just started on Zoom and then started in emails and then slowly announced myself as using she, they pronouns. The most exciting day for me was when I bought my she, they pin. I was like, yes, this feels good. This
Mm-hmm.
feels right. And so I started using the term non-binary, but that didn't fit. I think I
Mm-hmm.
would identify myself as non-binary for about a year, and it just never was really right. And then I heard about gender fluid. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when it clicked for me, is this idea that gender is something I can explore and play through. And some days, yeah, I'm feeling really freaking femme. Most days I feel really femme. I present very femme. I'm actually on a threads debate right now. There's a whole thing going on friends and on threads about women's spaces and non-binary identities
Yeah,
because
I think I saw that today.
yeah, and it's heating up. But I am very femme, but that does not erase the fact that I am gender fluid, that there is a non-binary part of me that loves to play. I love playing as non-binary, and a masculine part of me that I'm still working on healing. In
Right.
fact, fun fact, today is the very first day that I'm wearing boxers as my underwear of choice, like out in public and everything. And it is like so fun, which sounds like such a small thing. So many women will wear boxers as just a thing. But this, for me, I've got these hidden parts of my gender identity that you don't visibly see right now that I'm like playing with that bring me so much gender joy.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
this is so exciting for you.
it's so fun. It's so fun.
What?
And that is a huge digression from what we were talking, but it relates a lot to that mental health journey of it's something that was
Yeah.
always there, but I wasn't necessarily recognizing. I was somebody who experienced, as everybody does, experienced various forms of trauma at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
I hit puberty fast, and that comes with its own challenges. I don't think my bra size was ever smaller than a C cup. I think I woke up one day as a C cup. And it's the same thing with mental health. Like when I look back, I realized those things were depression, those things were my eating disorder.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize having an eating disorder until first year of university, but that eating disorder really was always present. It just didn't have the freedom to live. My mom was very cautious over my food. She was worried about my food intake.
Mm-hmm.
When I got my first car is when I was able to start hiding food and sneaking out to binge, sneaking out to get the food that my eating disorder was pulling me towards. I think if I didn't have parents that were watching me and protecting me and caring for me and supporting me, my mental illness would have thrived a lot sooner than it did.
Ooh. What was it something specific that triggered your eating disorder? Or did you just one day wake up and then you started binging food?
It's hard to say, and there's so many layers to it. Being in a abusive relationship at 14, 15, that warps with your
Oh my
head.
gosh, you were really young.
I was young. And now I'm watching my niece go through it, and it's terrifying because I see the effects of being in. We minimize the impacts of youth
Yeah,
dating, but those are such formative years that
they are.
I didn't know how to be in a relationship afterwards because all I knew was abuse. I didn't know how to date. I dated him for 5 years. My entire teenage life was
Wow.
just an abusive
Yeah.
relationship. I didn't know any different.
Was it mental, emotional, and physical?
I don't believe there was ever physical. I say that because my memories are missing.
Mm-hmm.
My brain protected itself. It did not convert the short term to the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's amazing what your body will do.
oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but he started. I found out because I have a friend I met through him. I'm still friends with to this day. They were best friends when we were dating, kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I became an adult, when we were in our 20s, and I was talking to this mutual friend, all these stories of things that he would say came up. So he had this story when we were dating that he would tell his buddies when they were playing video games that Megan's pregnant again and she doesn't want another abortion. So I think I'm just going to push her down the stairs and see if I can kill the baby. I was never pregnant. Not once did I get pregnant. I have PCOS. It was incredibly difficult for me to get pregnant. But he was telling his buddies that he had to push me down the stairs because I refused to get an abortion.
Was this to justify what he was about to do?
Except I have no memories of him pushing me down the stairs. I don't think he ever pushed me down the stairs. And so I asked my counselor. This actually spurred me to see a counselor for the first time. And I said, look, I know I don't have a lot of memories of this time, but wouldn't I remember that? Who would be so messed up enough to say they're pushing their girlfriend down the stairs when they really aren't? And my counselor very quickly said, no, if you were pushed down the stairs, I do believe you would remember that. Yes, you have a lot of holes, but I don't believe your body and your mind is protecting you from that memory. And my parents would have noticed if there were physical injuries.
Of course, yeah.
They were always on high alert for that. They knew exactly what was happening and they know how it escalates. So no, I feel confident in saying there was no direct physical abuse. There was indirect physical abuse. Sex hurt all the time,
Oof.
all the time. And he ignored that pain in me. There are many things to that, right? We're both young. We were both our first partners. We didn't know what sex was. I didn't know sex wasn't supposed to hurt like that.
Yeah.
There were physical side effects of the abuse, but there wasn't direct physical abuse per se that I know of.
Right. Wow. Oh my gosh. So when did you start seeking help? Obviously, this didn't help your binge eating.
Oh God, no.
After you would binge eat, did you throw up? And then you wouldn't eat for a
I
couple of days, or how did the binge eating work?
I so desperately wished I was anorexic. Genuinely wish. Would be on forums that there were forums at the time. The eating disorder forums are a dangerous place.
Mm,
And so many of them were promoting anorexia and giving people tips on how to stick with their anorexia.
mm,
So for me, when it came to the binging side of things, I remembered being taught that with bulimia, the constant act of throwing up would be noticeable on my teeth. And my family had a family dentist who was really good at his job. And I remember I can't throw up because he'll figure it out and he'll tell my parents.
ah,
It doesn't mean I didn't try.
mhm,
And there are still things that there have been times, like there's still toxic thoughts I had around purging.
mhm,
So instead, the routine of my eating disorder for the most and the worst part would be I'd wake up and I'd say, okay, that's it. I'm doing it. I'm switching my eating disorder because technically, yes, your eating disorders can change. Your diagnosis can change. Intentionally doing so, not usually really a thing that happens, but I would wake up and say, that's it. I'm not eating. I'm doing this today. I'm strong enough to do it today. And I would go the whole day without eating. Sometimes I would exercise, sometimes over exercise to do that. And that was my form of purging. But of course, all those emotions and the struggle and the craving for food, because at that point, I have a had a genuine food addiction, right? Carbs and sugars are addictive. I was addicted. When I first was talking to my doctor about trying to heal, and I said, I'm afraid of detoxing. What is that? And she said, it's with where you're at, it's going to be just as bad as a heroin detox
oof,
because of how strongly addicted we can get to carbs and sugars.
mhm.
And as somebody who has gone through that detox a few times, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But yeah, so I I was very aware of my mental illnesses at this point. It would have been 2011. At the time, I was working for a transition society here in BC, which was very healing for that history of abuse. This would have been a number of years afterwards. I would have recognized it and I moved on. And then I was able to learn a lot more through the transition
Mhm.
house about what happened to me when I was a teenager. And then I had the unfortunate experience of witnessing a shooting in the backyard of the place I was staying at and went into work the next day in complete and utter shock. And my supervisor just said, like, do you want to talk to the counselor? The transition house has a counselor. She was in that day, and they set me up with a phone call for her at lunch. And she helped me get through the shock and process all of that experience. And through that, I said, I was in an abusive relationship in high school. I've never really dealt with that. Can I see you? Am I even eligible to see you? Because I didn't think, first of all, the woman that I was working with experienced, in my view, far worse abuse than I. I didn't want to take the spot of somebody who had
Of course.
such significant trauma.
Mhm.
But no, the counselor, she right away said, no, you can come see me. And you are not taking the spot of anyone. And then, of course, I was like, will my colleagues find out? And she said, no, Nobody on the staff has to ever find out you're seeing me. That was around the end of my contract at the Transition Society. So it worked out that I started seeing her after I'd left the organization as an employee. I saw her for a bit. And that was the first time I had really sought out professional help for my mental health. Eventually, I saw her for a while. Eventually, I then went to SFU. I was a SFU student at the time and sought their counseling supports, which are great in a pinch. Finding the right counselor takes time for anybody, and it doesn't matter where they're from. I think it was when I was at my SFU counselor that they encouraged me to talk a bit more with my doctor. Um, but really, it was when I was an intern at Lululemon. Lululemon is a fantastic place to work at their head office, at least back then. Who knows now? I've still heard good things. I still have friends who work there. They
I've
love
heard
the
amazing
office.
things about, yeah.
That office is one of the coolest offices. They were renovating it when I was an intern there, and I've seen it's just such a cool office. And they're an incredibly supportive community. You can do yoga at lunch. They bring in people getting trained in massage therapy to do their practicum hours on us at any hour of the day. Like, there's so many benefits, and it was such a supportive workplace, and I was so depressed. And near the end of that, my mom said, if this is where you're at when you're in such a like good supportive environment, if you where you should be thriving, there's something more going on. I think you need help. So
Mm-hmm.
she spoke to our family doctor, because I still was with our family doctor at the time, and gave our family doctor our history of mental illness on that side of the family,
Right.
which is far more extensive than I realized it was at the time. And she went, oh, yes, we should get her in and
Right.
talk. And that's when I went on medication for the first time.
Oh, wow. That was a while. So you went through all of this. Did a part of you, I'm going to ask this because I'm sure that
You
I'm
know,
not the
I'm an
only one
open
thinking
book.
this. I know. But I'm asking this mostly because the audience is going to be like, was it a part of you thinking this is just what life is supposed to be like?
Even until very recently, I thought that's just life. In 2013, I was put on a low dose of Cipralex, which is pretty much one of the starter antidepressants there are,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's that Cipralex is the brand name, escitalopram is the generic name. And so I was on 10 milligrams of Cipralex for many years. I was like, there's a lot of stigma around medication. There's a lot of misconceptions on any type of mental health medication is just going to zombify you, change your personality. And there were changes. I am a very creative person. I was going to school for a degree in interactive art and technology. And I remember my first big video project while I was on these newer medications, struggling to come up with like concepts and stuff. And this was a new experience for me. And I think this was around the time where Robin Williams had passed away. So the conversation on creatives and mental illness was
Yeah.
really starting to enter the forefront. And I said to my mom, I was like, oh my God, what if my depression was my creativity? What if these meds have erased all my creativity? That was not at all what was happening, but that was my panic. And she went, don't you dare stop those meds. But yeah, it was an adjustment. And then I stayed on those 10 milligrams throughout university. And it was when I was working out of university and I was in a terrible employment situation. The company I worked for was not a safe employer. They were a horrible employer. And that was the lowest of low in my mental health. I was on medication, I was working, and my mental health it was dark. It reached some dark places during that time. At that point, I finally found a doctor that I didn't have to travel to. So my GP at the time was in Chilliwack. I was living in New Westminster. That's an hour drive at a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
So I found a doctor locally because I needed one. My eating disorder was still thriving, and I, at this point, was asking for more help. When you don't have the traditional eating disorders, like when you think of eating disorder, you think anorexia, bulimia,
Yes. That's
primarily.
exactly what I
Things
was
have
thinking.
changed, but
Yep.
it's what you think.
Yes.
When you don't have something like anorexia, there's not a lot of urgency in your healthcare.
No.
And so I found a doctor that was accepting new patients. I told her what was going on. And she said, how do you feel about upping your meds? I said, sure. I just don't want to be a zombie. This won't make you a zombie. So she upped them to 20 milligrams and she referred me to an eating disorder clinic that rejected me because I didn't have anorexia.
What? Oh.
This was the
This
first
is the
part of my
heartbreaking
discovery
part of
that
our healthcare system.
eating disorder healthcare is non-existent in
No,
Canada, really.
yeah, yeah.
Fast forward to when I relapsed significantly pre-pandemic while I was living in Toronto, one of the cities in Canada, cities in Chilliwack, I was going to say, but cities in Canada with the best access to healthcare. Healthcare blew me away with how
Yeah,
impressive
I'll
it
agree to
was.
that. I so will agree to that.
I couldn't
It
find
is
help.
it was very different for me moving to Toronto and having that become a lot more accessible than it was. Like I grew up in Ottawa and I thought it was decent here, but when you get to Toronto, everything moves 10 times faster. You can basically get a psychologist appointment almost like within a week, whereas here in
Mhm.
Ottawa, it would have taken me a good 8 to 9 months.
I got an
Easily.
MRI in less than a year. Even with
Same.
the hallucinations I was experiencing, in BC, it would have taken me two.
Easily.
Yeah, but even in Toronto, so even in Toronto, where the healthcare is so fantastic, when I relapsed and I was referred to a psychiatrist, and this is when I got my official diagnosis, because up until that point, this was late 20, up until that point, I refused. I didn't want an official diagnosis. And
You didn't
at
want to
that
come to
point,
terms with the fact that your eating disorder was
there was a lot of, for one, I didn't like the term that I would have been diagnosed with up until 2015. The DSM didn't change. Was it 2015 when it changed? The DSM changed in 2015 to recognize binge eating disorder, I think. It still had a terrible name for other eating disorders, not otherwise specified kind of thing. I can't remember what the old name was for it now. I'm blanking. But in 2015 is when binge eating disorder was officially recognized by the DSM-5. But at that point, I didn't know that. I wasn't following the changes in mental health care system. To me, diagnosis were labels that the medical system would judge me on. And I was afraid of that judgment. I was afraid of other things being dismissed, which even without a diagnosis I received, I had a skin condition that I still deal with that I believe is associated with my PCOS. And it was causing rampant infections in my body. I was at one point put on 4 different antibiotics in the spread of 3 months because of the infections I was getting due to the skin condition. I asked for a dermatologist referral. My doctor gave me that dermatologist referral. I waited months for it, if not more. I went to the dermatologist. That doctor saw me for 5 minutes at the most. She barely looked at my skin. And the second, when she asked me, "What medication are you on?" and I said, "Cipralex," she put her pen down and stopped writing. And very quickly after that, told me it was just a physical manifestation of my depression. I want to say this started when I was like in middle school. It is not a physical manifestation of my depression, but I didn't. I was speechless at the time.
of course.
So even without a diagnosis, I was getting mistreated and pigeonholed in the medical system. I had heard rumors that it'll impact your insurance. Of course, that's more of a United States thing, but information is not always clear. So I was afraid of that. But when I relapsed in 2019 and when my mental health was as low as it was in 2019, for context, I would do 2020 over again and again rather than ever experience my 2019 ever again. Give me a pandemic any day.
I think
That's
you're
when
the
I
only
said I
one
wanted
in that,
diagnosis.
but
Hmm?
sure. I think you're the only one who thinks
I
that.
think so.
Sure.
I think so. But to be fair,
But to
that
be
was an
fair, your 2019 was your
awful,
pandemic year. Yeah.
awful year for me. It included my cat and I almost setting my apartment on fire. It included my
Yes.
sexual assault. It included a car accident. It included my PCOS diagnosis. It was a terrible year.
To give you guys some
Um,
context too, like Megan and I had connected during all of this happening, and I think days after your apartment fire.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, somewhere around there. Now,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't set on fire. It was just very close. And my cat did save my life, despite he and I are both at fault for it almost happening, and he saved my life. That's all I'll say. But because I'm very defensive over my cat.
So you got your diagnosis
Got
in
my diagnosis.
2019.
And when I was seeing the psychiatrist and she said, "Why do you want a diagnosis? What do you want out of this?" I very much said, "I want a diagnosis because I need help. I cannot beat this eating disorder alone. I barely did it the first time. I absolutely don't want to do it alone the second time. It took
Mm.
so long." And she said, "What does help look like for you?" And I said, ideally inpatient would be great. Like, I genuinely sign me up for the psych ward, something, anything. And I said, but if not, like a program. I want a program. I don't know what that is. You tell me how to fix this. And when she did give me my diagnosis, she had to have the very difficult conversation to let me know that there is no treatment. There's no inpatient treatment for binge eating disorder, period, in Canada. There are outpatient services available in 4 hospitals at that time across Canada, and none of them were in Toronto. Binge eating disorder is the most common eating disorder in all of Canada. It's the most common.
And there's no true diagnosis until recently. And there's no treatment centers.
There's no treatment
centers.
Part of the problem, I think, is because anorexia has a very emergent risk to your health, right?
Yes.
Anorexia can kill you very quickly. Binge eating disorder might still kill me, even though I consider myself in recovery from it. But I essentially poisoned my body for a decade. It could still kill me.
Wow.
My mental health experiences in Canada have been better than a lot of people have experienced, and I'm very grateful for that. I have a lot of privileges afforded to me in my mental health care.
Yeah, definitely sounding like that. When you got your diagnosis in 2019,
technically January 2020, actually.
So months after said diagnosis in 2020, pandemic hits.
Yeah.
Did that get worse or better? Your binge eating? Oh, of course, because now you're isolated.
Worse. I had my assessment in December of 2019. Early January, I got okay, this is my formal diagnosis. Let's set a treatment plan for you. Mm-hmm. So the plan was I would start this cognitive behavioral therapy group out of Women's College Hospital in Toronto. I would start that in February. That's the first one that was happening. I would get a referral to a dedicated counselor to treat me properly. And I think there was another referral that was supposed to go through for me. I can't quite remember. The referral for the CBT group came in pretty quickly. I did 3 weeks of that before everything shut down. Everything. We couldn't access the hospital. They didn't know. They were like, maybe we'll return via Zoom. We don't know. We think at that time it was a 2-week thing. So they're like, oh, we're shutting down. Once we figure it out, we'll get back to you. Weeks went by, turned into months. Pandemic wasn't going anywhere. I never heard from anybody ever again. It was so hard for me to ask for help the second time. The first time was fine, but then I felt like I had recovered. I felt like I had a good grasp on my mental health and my mental illness when I transitioned to Toronto. 2017, 2018 were pretty strong years for me. And then having it all come crashing down, asking for help the second time was so difficult for me to do because it was embarrassing. I had done this. I'd been there. I beat it. I shouldn't need the help again. I can't believe I relapsed. And so then
ego?
Oh yeah, ego. So many things. And just when you're at that point in my life, I was unrecognizable. I was putting on a good face for work because I had to still go into the office. But the second I stepped out of that office, I was a walking corpse, really. I could feel the deadness behind my eyes. And when I didn't have a GP at the time and I didn't have, walking clinics were tough to get into. And it was actually my PCOS specialist, my gynecologist, who got me the help that I needed because I went in for a PCOS checkup. And unfortunately, PCOS healthcare revolves around diet. And my PCOS diagnosis is a huge part in my relapse because having to put that much emphasis on a proper diet for me brought up all the triggers. And so one of the first questions whenever I had my check-in with my PCOS gyno was, how's your eating? And everything tumbled out of me when she asked that question. She could see it on my face. She knew I had the history of the eating disorder. It was then that I disclosed for the first time to a professional about the sexual assault that had occurred just a couple months before, about the car accident that had happened just a couple of weeks before the sexual assault. we hadn't even reached, I don't think, the non-fire in my apartment yet at that stage. And it just all came tumbling out. And she went, okay, we're putting the PCOS on hold. We're getting you into a psychiatrist. This was not her job. That's the job of a GP. She knew I didn't have a GP, so she took it on for me because she could
Mm.
see the need and the desperation in my face for help, which is nice because usually specialists don't like to take care of the other things, but that's how significant in need she could see I was. And then I ended up finding a GP shortly after that. And when you get a new GP, they want to do a little meet and greet. I couldn't fake it for my meet and greet. I had just left work. We had gone out for drinks after work, and I had put on all my energy in faking being okay for
Yeah, it takes
that.
a lot.
And the doctor's office was across the street from the bar because everything in Toronto was right downtown.
Yep.
And I walked in and I had nothing left. I was literally a zombie sitting in that chair
Sure.
and going, "Oh, tell me about yourself." And I went, "This year I was sexually assaulted. I was in a car accident. There was an almost fire. I have depression and eating disorder. I'm waiting for a referral from a psychiatrist. What else do you want to know?" He's like, "Oh, we have some medical crises we need to take care of, I see."
Yeah.
It was very apparent. Yeah, that was tough. The having to ask for help again was really tough. And then when the pandemic hit, after a few months, I finally got the courage to call and see what's up. Why haven't I heard from anybody? I hadn't
Hmm.
received my referral to a counselor. I hadn't heard anything about the CBT group, and I wanted to see what was going on. It was early summer at this stage. And so they weren't opening up, but they were more understood, safer to
Yeah.
be going out.
Yeah.
And so when I called to follow up, I found out that the CBT group had started again and was actually just about to finish because it had started that long ago. They
And
saw
nobody
that I had
called
received,
you?
nobody called me. They didn't know why I was never called. They couldn't figure it out. They saw that there was supposed to be a referral for me for a counselor. Nobody ever called me. It never went through. And that third thing, I don't even remember what it was. I was just by the time when I heard that the CBT group had started again, and I had just I slipped through the cracks, which I get.
Hmm.
Things happen all the time.
Yeah.
I couldn't ask for help again. I didn't have it in me. I was done at
Yeah.
that point. I had given up. I was already stuck in this apartment, this 236 square foot apartment in a pandemic lockdown in downtown Toronto, just me and the cat, couldn't access foods. That was one of the scariest things for me is I'm in the middle of my eating disorder and food has become scarce. You remember how empty those shelves were.
Oh yeah.
One
Oh
of the
yeah.
most important things for me was like,
A full fridge.
for me, it was Honey Nut Cheerios. Okay, so Honey Nut Cheerios to me were like, they weren't the worst food you could eat a bunch of, weren't the best, but it was okay. And it was something that helped quell those instant binge cravings. So if I was like, oh my, like getting when a binge comes on, it's all I can think about. Like
Hmm.
thinking about the ability to not be thinking about food 24/7 was something new to me in my 30s. But yeah, Honey Nut Cheerios had become part of my okay. I have a binge. I can't control it. I'm going to start with a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios. See if that calms things down. Because if that calms things down, I can manage it and I won't go into a full binge.
Hmm.
So it was like a safety comfort food for me. I don't know if that's a healthy way of doing it because again, there's not enough actual treatment and
Data.
support for binge eating
Yeah.
disorder for me. I had to figure out my own strategies and this was
Yeah.
one. Honey Nut Cheerios, I was going through boxes a week, multiple boxes a week, because it was such an important food for me to stay stable-ish.
Hmm.
And Honey Nut Cheerios became unavailable during the pandemic. They were nowhere to be found, and there was no replacement for me. I was in full panic mode for months until Honey Nut Cheerios became available on the shelves again. And the worst part was is because food was so scarce, I was then needing to binge without food to binge on. And it was like, substance use is terrible. Binging is terrible for your body. But could you imagine being a substance user, feeling the need, the absolute need and withdrawal, but not being able to access your substance?
Yeah.
An alcoholic who suddenly couldn't access any alcohol, that's so
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah.
And I was an addict without any means to not only get my addiction fed, but also couldn't enter spaces because my addiction was something I also needed to live. I can't cold turkey food.
No.
and I couldn't. It was awful. It was truly awful. It's such a small problem to have during a global pandemic, but it was so challenging.
So survival, it was literally survival.
Mhm.
You were literally like building yourself up every single day to survive one more day.
And when I could find Honey Nut Cheerios, oh, I bought the shelf. I
Oh,
think I
wow.
think Shoppers Drug Mart got it at one point, and they only had 5 boxes on the shelf, and I took them all. And I brought them to the till with this look of joy on my face, and the people looking at me like I was nuts. But I got my Honey Nut Cheerios. In fact, I was okay. At this point, I was an established PR person. Twitter was still a thing and a safer space to be on. I refuse to call it anything other than its dead name. And Global was looking for somebody with an experience of eating disorders to talk about how the food shortages on the shelf were impacting people with eating disorders. And
Mm.
I'm a pro with media interviews. But that timing of the interview, this woman must have thought I was like absolutely losing it because of how obsessively I would talk about Honey Nut Cheerios during this interview. I don't think any of it made it into the actual article. I barely made it into the actual article because I was just giving her crap. And I knew as I was doing it, I was giving her
Yeah.
crap, but I could not. I was just like, I need to find these Honey Nut Cheerios and I can't find them anywhere. They're nowhere. And she's like, it's weird.
Yeah, so you really got fixated though,
Yeah.
because you're looking for the comfort and you're looking for basically your quote unquote version of medication at this point in the
Yeah.
game.
It was one thing that helped me find a sense of it was one go-to that I was like, usually I could find stability again. And if it didn't do the trick, then I knew it was bad enough where I could give into the binge. So one of my earliest treatment things, I guess I could say, when I finally found the counselor that worked best for me, this was before I had even moved to Toronto, and how I first started working through and felt like I had reached a place of recovery. One of the easiest and most important things that my counselor taught me is when you feel a binge and you need to, don't respond right away. Give yourself an hour. If in an hour that call goes away, then you're good. If it doesn't, I'd rather you partake in that binge than let that guilt and need and obsession bring you down. If it takes an hour or two, push yourself, go for two. But if at 2 hours you are still unable to think of anything else, then it's okay. And that was so important to me to let go of the shame I felt every time I'd walk into a grocery store to buy food that I knew I was going to eat within hours. I'm talking $100 worth of food a day I would binge in the span of an hour to two, which did nothing good for my finances.
No.
And so that was the strategy I had
Did
with
it
Honey Nut
translate to
Cheerios.
other things? If you weren't binge eating, were you binge shopping?
I mean, I always like to shop, but no. No, it
Okay.
wasn't the same.
There
It
was the
wasn't
same
the
gratification.
same numbing. Food was numbing for me.
It was
Like when
numbing.
I binge, it was
Oh,
like a
interesting.
blackout. It's like time and space no longer have meeting.
Ooh.
There were times where I didn't even realize I was eating. Like my ex-partner, when my eating disorder started, we were on video chat because we were long distance and we would just have video chat on all the time. And he eventually just said, "Stop eating M&Ms. You've been not like hand to mouth for the past hour. I haven't seen you stop eating." I didn't even realize I was eating M&Ms. I was like, "What are
Oh,
you what?"
wow. Like you had oh my gosh.
It's the
Okay.
weirdest thing. Like
What does life look like now?
I realized I forgot to finish part of a story earlier on about medication.
Mhm.
Going back to medication, I was on the 20 milligrams of Cipralex for a very long time,
Yes.
escitalopram eventually. And when I moved back to BC, I moved in with my parents. So in September, October of 2020, in the pandemic,
Mhm.
I moved back to BC with my cat. BC doesn't have the same lovely laws that Ontario has about discriminating against pet owners. I had to live with them for a while until I could find a place to live that I could bring my fur baby with because there was no way I was leaving him behind.
Of course.
Living with my parents was incredibly therapeutic for me. I put strategies in place. I created my own treatment center out of my parents' house.
Fair.
I made sure I did all the cooking for dinner. Like that was important to me was that I was cooking the food so I could rebuild that relationship with food. It was very important for me to be able to cook for other people because I wanted to nourish my loved ones. And then when I moved out on my own, I found a doctor. Again, finding a doctor, always a problem. I actually didn't even find a doctor. I found a nurse practitioner and I wouldn't go back. I think nurse practitioners are amazing. And she told me about Wellbutrin. So,
Mm,
Wellbutrin, according to her, was like a supplemental medication to give your antidepressant a boost.
yep. I was
I
on
said to my
Wellbutrin for a little while.
Oh my God. I said to my mom, I had no idea life could be this. This is what it's supposed to be like more. Like,
I wish I had that.
I wish. Like,
I didn't have the same reaction that
oh,
you had to Wellbutrin. I spent the 4 months that I was on it, I literally, it felt like
oh no.
I could only equate it to this, and it's not how I want to equate it to, but I could only equate it to being pregnant, like the first trimester of my pregnancies. All I ever did was throw up and feel super nauseous. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to move. It felt so gross. I remember one day talking to my doctor being like, you have to do something. There's something going on. And I don't know if it's the medication that I've been put on. He was like, let's take you off of everything right now. Do it for a week, see if it helps, and then we'll ease back into the medication. And Wellbutrin was the last thing that they were about to put me on. And he was like, that's got to be it. We're not putting you back on it. Felt like I literally, and it still took 6 months to get out of my system.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And I've gone through antidepressant withdrawal, and that is terrifying.
That's so much harder.
It is. The things that I was experiencing was something out of the ring. I swear. My
Okay, I didn't
vision,
have that.
my
Oh,
vision would like do the things the TV would do in the video in there. Oh, it was weird. No, I'm so grateful. I didn't have your experience. Sorry, but
no, it's great.
Wellbutrin
The
changed the
thing is,
game for me.
it's super weird, right? Because
Everybody
when
responds so differently.
exactly, and when my doctor had put me on it, he was like, I'm putting you on this because we've seen other women especially react really well to it, especially when they're on antidepressants. It was like it gave you the extra boost that you needed to get out of bed when your antidepressant was like, I don't want to do this today. And it definitely, for me especially, when I was on antidepressants, I would forget to eat.
Mm,
But the Wellbutrin was like a Kickstarter for my appetite, being like, no, you have to eat.
yeah.
So that part was great, but then I would
But then you were throwing out the food anyway.
throw it up. Yeah, so it wouldn't matter. But yeah, so I've heard things of it being really good for most people. Just for me, it was.
Amazing. Oh, chef's kiss. Would never go back. Um, One of the interesting things of having such a better, even when I considered myself in recovery when it came to my eating disorder, it was like by the skin of my teeth or whatever that phrase is. I experienced many binges during that period of recovery.
Yeah.
I was fighting for recovery, whereas now I'm more comfortably in recovery. Yeah, food's still an addiction for me. Like it'd be like any substance user having to participate in their substance a moderated amount because we need food to survive. If I have a chocolate bar, I'm going to want all the chocolate in the world. I just need
Yeah.
to learn, right? Like it's different. It is still a different feeling. It's not as uncontrollable, but think about how fun it is to like Friday night, you don't have to go to work, put on some movie, get in your PJs, and gorge out on a smorgasbord of snack food. Who doesn't love that night?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just was having that night every night.
So
But I
did
still
you
like
just
to enjoy
never
this.
feel full?
So I had stretched out my stomach so much, I didn't know what feeling full felt like. I remember
Oh.
the first time I felt full, my first time in recovery, I was like, oh my God, like I'm full. It had been years. I hadn't felt full since I was probably 19.
Wow.
I don't know.
Wow.
The feeling of full when that came back to me was really exciting.
Oh my goodness. So now you're on a good, I'm guessing a cocktail.
Yeah, so I've got 20 milligrams of 300 milligrams of Wellbutrin. I have my IUD, which is adding an interesting complication to it all. That's
Mm,
newer.
mm.
And
Yeah, we'll bring you back on when I bring on women about the IUD, because I'm telling you, I'm on it and
so
I
the only reason is because this particular IUD helps prevent cervical cancer. And apparently, being a person with PCOS puts you at high risk of
higher risk.
cervical
Yeah.
cancer.
Yeah.
Nobody told me that until my NP. So
Yeah.
I
That's
am,
still a
that's
new
the only
study
reason.
though, I think.
Was that?
I think it's still relatively new. That
PCOS is so understudied. Nobody knows
Exactly.
anything about it.
No.
Everybody's just guessing.
Forbid they know more about the female body.
Hello, health gap. It's worse than the pay
I
gap.
know. So life is better.
Life's better.
Okay, so let's talk about how life is better because something is popping off today when this podcast launches on November 27th. Something amazing is happening today. Actually, it's already happened. You did a soft launch. So tell us what's happening today in your business world because you took all of this pain and turned it into lemonade.
Yeah, I joked at the start of this about having started an accidental business.
Yes.
Back in 2018 is when I heard the statistic that 1 in 5 Canadians will experience mental illness in a year. And something about that stat just really connected with me. I was like, oh, I am 1 in 5. It made me feel like I was a part of something, like I was part of a community in a sense, even though it's not really like a community everybody wants to be in. And so you remember Toronto on Queen Street, there are like, at the time, I think COVID put them all out of business, but there were like 10 different make your own t-shirt businesses. You could walk in, walk out with a new shirt in 15 minutes. And I walked into one of those on my way home from work on a whim and said, hey, can you just put like the number one? I had to explain the number one. Oh, it took me forever to explain it. And then IN, and then the number 5, just in Helvetica. It was the simplest design, and this poor woman had no clue what the heck I was doing. I just wanted that on a sweater. And so yeah, I walked out with this 1 in 5 on a sweater. I posted a photo of it to social media, just talking about my experiences with mental illness. It was absolutely not the first time I had talked about my experiences with mental illness on any of my social media accounts, but that one blew up and people started asking me where I got that sweater. That kind of had me thinking, oh, maybe there's something here. I felt this sense of community and acceptance just in a stat. Maybe I'm not alone. In 2019, in February, I launched 1 in 5 apparel, and it was the same. It was a updated, better version of the 1 in 5 design that I had some Toronto print shop do, and I ran it as a print-on-demand service through Shopify. At that time, I was already a full-time entrepreneur in public relations, and this was just something fun. I was like, it's print on demand. It'll pretty much run itself. If I make $100 a month, cool. It's some side income. And then I made about $1,000 in the first week.
Oh my gosh.
And
That's amazing.
it was fantastic. It was so exciting. I got, again, my PR background came in handy. I got national news coverage of the line. It fundraises for a scholarship. So people loved it. It hit something. It touched something. The same thing that stat connected with me, it connected with other people. And really, when you think about it, if I were to ask you, how do we end the stigma on mental illness? Okay, we recognize that especially back then, we've made a lot of progress even since 2018. But if I'd asked you, how do we end the stigma around mental illness? What would you have said?
We need to talk about it more. We need to get in front of people's faces.
How do we talk about it with people who aren't already talking about it?
I hate to say force the conversation.
But how do you it's such like, how do you get people talking about it if they're not already engaged in the space? That was this unanswerable question.
It's so true though.
And so by putting 1 in 5 in a sweater, when I was wearing the one I had bought and seeing people were into this, every time I wore it out in public, somebody would ask me, the heck does that mean? Like, what is 1 in 5? And I realized it was a conversation starter. That gave me the window of opportunity to be like, oh, 1 in 5 people will experience mental illness in a year. And from then, some people would get uncomfortable and be like, oh, well, that's okay, cool, and move on. A lot of people were like, wow, really that many? And it started the conversation with people who maybe had never talked or thought about it in that light before. It changed people's perceptions on what mental illness is, what it looks like, because you looked at me and you didn't see somebody with a mental illness per se. How many times when I first would tell people I had depression, I was told, but you're always smiling.
Oh my God, I thought I was the only one who heard that. One more person tells me, but you're
if
always
one more person
smiling,
tells me, but you always smile. You're always so happy. I'm like, you can try being in this brain and see how happy it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it became this really simple way of opening up the conversation. And if people didn't want to participate in the conversation, they made that very clear with their body language, and I didn't press it. But it created this window of opportunity. It created this, oh, yeah, I have mental illness. I didn't realize it was like, and then it was like, yeah, so do I. And we got to form that bond. It created human connection amongst us.
Mm-hmm.
So after doing all the research and business planning and the work that goes into starting a business that you're very familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
I launched One in Five in February as a print on demand. It blew up. I realized I'm trying to operate two full-time businesses and I can't do both.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a long time deciding what is it that I wanted to pursue? Who am I? What am I here to do on this earth? What is it that I'm passionate about? I'd been in public relations for 10 years at this point. It was something like that was what I was doing. I went to school, I did a degree in communication. I make awesome things happen in the PR world. And I loved PR. But by that point, I had accomplished a lot of my PR goals. And I don't look like a typical PR girl. I don't
Mm-hmm.
act like a typical PR girl. And the PR world can be highly toxic,
Yeah.
no matter what field you're in. I avoided a lot of the toxic PR spaces, but there's still this edge about PR.
Yeah.
And so I decided that I would go full in on One in Five. My
Mm-hmm.
plan in, I think it was in December of 2019, right when everything was super great mental health wise, one of the things that I was holding on to was this awesome business plan I put together.
Ooh.
It was beautiful. This thing, I was working with Rise Asset Development. I think they just go by Rise now because they rebranded around this time, but they are an organization based in Toronto, but Canada wide, and they support entrepreneurs who live with mental illness or have experienced addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a small loan program. They also have training. So I had done their entrepreneurship training program. I knew how to start a business. When I applied for it, they're like, you have a business. What do you need from this? And was able to justify why. And it was a great program. It was such a good program. It taught me what I did need, what I was
Right.
missing. And it gave me the structure to actually launch the business. And so then, yeah, like it had proven its value. It had proven that there was something there. And so I was going to get a loan and buy my own inventory. And I was going to get a job across the street at Greenhouse Juice because I loved juice. They loved me. And that way I'd have some reliable income while I built this thing. And then the pandemic hit and the juice place closed. Wasn't hiring during a
Of
pandemic.
course. Yeah.
I was terrified at the thought of getting a $7,000 loan to buy inventory without a job. I had left my reliable PR employment in January to do this and thought I would keep all my other contracts. Unfortunately, I prioritized nonprofit and small businesses in my PR work. And when a pandemic hits, what's the first contract to get cut? Your public relations and
Yeah.
marketing. So I lost all my clients in the span of a week. So I had no sources of income, was terrified at the idea of a loan. And on top of that, all my print on demand warehouses, all the places that were making my product, shut down because they were all based in the United States and Donald Trump did not handle things well.
Right.
So they couldn't have staff. Like they were getting too sick. Warehouses were shutting down. And
Mm-hmm.
what started out as taking a month to maybe 2 months for people to get their product when they ordered from my website turned into taking a month to 2 months for the product to just be shipped. I'm not okay with that delay.
No.
Neither were customers. And
Of course.
so I made the really difficult decision in early summer to say, hey, we'll be back,
Mm-hmm.
but we got to figure this pandemic thing out. I did not expect that to take 3 years,
Of course
but
not.
it did.
Mm-hmm.
It did. Life happened many times in those 3 years. I moved across the country in those 3 years, but
Yeah.
eventually I reconnected with Rise at a certain point and said, okay, let's do this.
I'm ready.
I'm doing it. And it still took me another year and a bit after that to actually launch the website.
It happens. Those things happen.
But we're back. We're back,
Yeah.
baby. Oneinfiveapparel.com is live. It's not perfect,
It doesn't need to be.
far from it, but it's back. And it feels really good to be doing again. It's
So exciting.
so exciting. It's so nice. And all these ideas and plans and things I've wanted to do ever since 2019 can finally start happening.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So exciting. So exciting. So, one, it'll be in the show notes, but you also kicked off something amazing around during the pandemic. You took more of your mental health pain and turned it into.
Are you talking tarot reflections, maybe?
I am. I am. I am. So no, I was like one of the first people that Megan told that she was going to launch a podcast, and I was so excited for her.
And then I immediately disappointed you in being the
Yeah,
most
first of all, oh my gosh,
inconsistent
how
podcaster in the world.
horrible of a person would I be if I told you you disappointed me? First of all, Megan can never disappoint me. That's never a thing. Second of all, I always get excited for your episodes, Megan, because one, they make me really think about where I'm at. And there's a reason I think that I'm listening to those episodes, because that's literally a sign from the universe that I either need to reflect inward as to how I'm feeling. And they also are just like the quiet moments that I need to myself, because I'm a busy person. I have 2 kids. I have a busy business. Like, I'm a busy person. So sometimes taking those moments to reflect on what's happening inside me don't happen. But your podcast makes me do it. So what's happening?
That's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, let's get to the good stuff. What's happening in Tarot? First of all, what is Tarot Reflections?
So Tarot Reflections is my podcast. They are shorter episodes. They're getting harder and harder to keep short because if you haven't figured it out by this point in the podcast, I am a talker. But it started out with the idea of doing a daily podcast, which
So from one podcaster / podcast producer to my audience, if you're thinking about launching a podcast, don't start off with it being a daily one, because it takes a lot more energy than you think. And I think that Megan figured that. First of all, I was so proud of you though for thinking that you could do it daily.
to be fair, I thought they'd be like,
what were my words to you, Megan, when you told me that you were going to do it daily?
maybe start off weekly. I lasted 5 days of doing it daily. Oh no, wait, I think 4. I think I lasted 4 days.
I know, I loved it.
To be fair, the idea was that they would be just short tarot readings. Like they were the idea was a 1-card pull to give you an outlook for the day ahead. My chat, any podcasting starting out, you feel a little awkward, right? Like you don't really know how to start. You got to find your flow. Like I found my sort of structure for the podcast by now, and it does require more than 3 minutes. It absolutely wouldn't work for a daily podcast. Like it took me time to figure that out. But the idea originally was to just do a tarot reading to start your day. And it would be like 3 to 5 minutes, no big deal. But then I started wanting to talk more and get into deeper conversations. And that didn't work for a daily podcast. So now it's supposed to be weekly. Keyword being supposed to. I'm calling season 3 the most inconsistent season ever.
Oh my gosh, are you 3 seasons already?
Yeah, because I keep starting and stopping. I think season 1 is like 6 episodes. Season 2 was the most consistent it was for a while. And then actually it was funny because I started getting consistent for season 2. I started launching season 2 because I was dating somebody at the time and we wanted to go vacation to Mexico. And I said, I can only afford to vacation to Mexico if I'm making money. So the podcast became my Let's Get Us to Mexico fund. And then within I think it was 2 weeks of me publishing consistently for that plan, he broke my heart. And then the podcast became a way for me to heal. So that is why it was consistent for a while. Mm-hmm. And then when I healed, I felt like I didn't have much more to say. So then I dropped it again. But so season 2 was consistent for a bit. And then season 3, when did I say I was starting season 3? I think that was at the beginning of this year. And I've maybe done
so. I think you told me that you were going to
5 episodes.
Yes, but I will say this is that you went into season 3 telling me that you were like, okay, I recognize like where the downfalls are happening and I'm understanding why I'm being inconsistent, and I'm only going to do 1 episode a week, which is very encouraging, which would still work out in your favor because they were still shorter episodes. Mm-hmm. But then having a podcast really takes a lot of time, energy, and sometimes money, right? Like editing, show notes, especially the editing tools, it can take a lot of funds. And when you're not making money off your podcast,
it's hard. And the tech, you're right. I need to be a little fair to myself. My laptop is a decade old. it's not really able to run the programs anymore. The exciting news is on Monday, my new iMac is showing up.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, we will
I'm
talk
so
more about
excited.
that offline later because I need details.
So yeah, editing a podcast was taking forever because it took my computer forever just to render. I couldn't do anything. I was just waiting for my computer to start working again.
Yeah. Homegirl
Um,
is feeling your pain right now.
yeah. Yeah, it was pain. And then also, I'm talking about very personal, very deep, very meaningful topics. I am talking about our mental health. I am talking about some challenging self-reflection we have to do. And that part of it just needs to come naturally to me. There have been times where I've tried to force an episode and I feel it. Not to say that season 4 isn't intended to be consistent. I think I just have a better grasp of my life and have come further to be able to talk about things without needing a IRL experience to trigger my brain. You
Mm-hmm.
know, a lot of during season 2, the consistent podcast episodes were being inspired by my work. At that time in 2021, I went back to working full time for somebody else and not being my own boss. So my schedule completely changed. I was having to commute to work and commute back, and I was exhausted. So it was hard to do anything while I was working. But I was also working with clients. So I work in community support work. I work in a rural community in BC where there's a lot of mental health need. And my position put me in the space to provide that mental health support. And so quite often, a lot of podcast topics started off as almost like group therapy sessions. So once a month, I would go into this supported income or supported living building, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably looked like an AA meeting. I'd have the chairs set up in a circle. I'd have some guiding questions, and we would talk about a specific topic. We talked about control a lot because a lot of the residents there struggled with what they can and cannot control. We talked about anxiety and depression. We would talk about anger management, all these things that they would share their very real stories and struggles. I would share tips and advice and my experiences. And from that, I would always feel so inspired and go home and write a podcast episode on the very topic I was just coaching them on.
Right.
So that helped inspire that consistency as well. And then I shifted into a less client facing role.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing a different type of work where I wasn't always thinking about the mental health stuff as much.
Mm.
And so it became harder for me to find topics. And I got so wrapped up. I'm a person who can't say no to things. Like,
Ooh.
okay, let's talk about what I have planned from now until February, the end of February. From now until February, I will have launched 3 new brands. I am managing a research project that is funded by the government of Canada. I
Yes,
am
we've talked
about
about
to
that.
receive a contract that is a subcontract from the government of Canada to create a resource hub for people with disabilities to find employment. I am part of developing a grade school curriculum, an anti-oppression curriculum. I am part of planning anti-oppression events in this community, and I am the co-founder of Hope Pride, a brand new baby pride organization, and am now working to plan a pride festival for June as well.
Busy.
That's all. That's just a little much. I got a little
No,
much.
not
I'm
much.
about to go hire 2 people. I've got two
Did
people
we
I'm
not
about to
just
put.
talk about like 30 seconds ago being like, does your binge eating manifest in other ways?
I've
I'm not
never been able
saying,
to say
I'm
no.
not saying, I'm not
This has
saying.
always been me. Yes, I keep myself distracted, but I'm also a single woman without kids. I've got more time flexibility and freedom than your average 30 something year old with a family.
Yeah,
It keeps me busy.
fair,
And when I'm not busy, then I get too much time to think and
fair,
eat.
fair. So when is the fourth season launching and what will the fourth season look like?
That's an excellent question. Well, first of all, I should tease that between now and probably sometime in December 8th, I will be doing a final season 3 episode that will look at the year ahead. Because I don't even think we finally mentioned that, yes, there's still tarot reading in this podcast.
Yes.
The original idea of reading tarot cards did stick, it just became more than that. So I'm going to do a tarot read for the community for the year ahead and what the year ahead might bring for our mental health because I am a mental health tarot card reader. I don't like knowing that much about people's future, but I can talk to you about your mental health. So let's look at mental health and messages that the universe has for you in regards to your mental health. But if you want to talk about if you're going to get married or have kids or anything else for your future, I don't want to know that information about you. It's too much information. I've done traditional tarot reads and it scares me when I get them right.
Yeah.
Really scares me. One of my earliest reads was one of the same people who told me, but I smile all the time because I have when I have depression. It was New Year's Eve when I was just learning to read tarot cards. And at that time, I was still reading the Romany deck. So I hadn't even gotten to the full traditional Rider-Waite style deck. And I was just doing fun readings, still reading from the book to see what your year ahead is going to be. To be fair, she had told me that her and her husband had been trying to conceive their first child and struggling before I did her reading. So that did shade my thinking. But when I read her cards, I was like, if I'm reading this right, it looks like you're going to get pregnant this year in the early parts of the year. I don't see this being a problem. I see parenthood being a huge aspect of this year. She conceived that night. Happy New Year.
Talk about a gift.
And that freaked me out. But yeah. And then recently, I don't even know if I had the chance to tell you this. So I'm not having an identity crisis. I am getting really curious about my ancestry right now because I have discovered that I always thought I was the weirdo witch in my family, right? My parents are not spiritual, not woo-woo.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a pretty crystal, Megan. I don't what and it's so sweet. My mom, she'll buy the crystals every once in a while. She'll buy me something. She'll like, I think it's you, but she doesn't know the difference between amethyst and rose quartz. She knows what amethyst is because it's a common enough stone, but still, right?
No, but she doesn't know the symbolism behind it.
They support my stuff even though they don't understand it.
Yeah.
So this witchy thing for me, it didn't come from them. It absolutely didn't come from
curiosity.
When I look back, I was always witchy. My imaginary friends when I was in like the second grade were the wind, the rain. Like I was talking to the trees when I was a kid. I know it's so adorable now. And now it totally makes sense. But like I had names for all the trees on my elementary school playground. They were all my friends.
I love that.
I loved crystals and rocks. I just didn't know what the heck I was doing with them. All these things I was like, oh, that's really cool, but I didn't recognize it as magic. I didn't recognize it as witchcraft. It took a long time for me to recognize it as magic. And I watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer, watching that. Buffy's version of Wiccanism in their storytelling is fairly accurate to my knowledge. There's a lot of obviously dramatized pieces, but there's a lot of truth behind it. And so when I was watching Buffy, that appealed to me so much, but it was make believe, right? It wasn't real, but I wish it was real because then I would totally be a witch. I laughed out because I am a witch. I always was. So yeah, and of course, like when I first was like, oh, there are people who consider themselves witches out there. Like witchcraft is a thing. Still feel weird being like, I'm a witch when you grew up hearing witches are just the costume for Halloween.
Yeah, yeah.
It took a long time for me to be able to say I'm a witch with a straight face or feeling the need to apologize or explain myself.
Right.
Or defend the fact that I'm not somebody who should be put in a mental institution permanently. So, yeah, witchcraft has always been there. I just didn't recognize it.
Right.
And then as I started exploring it more and starting asking more questions, I discovered that not only was my oud oma, so my great grandmother on my dad's side, a professional tarot card reader, but I had a long line on that side of the family of seers, mediums, palm readers, crystal ball readers, people who work with the dead. Like I come from a long line of witches and I had no idea.
Ooh, this is so exciting.
It's so exciting. And there are things that I've discovered that I've grown up thinking I was Dutch. My last name's de Boekhorst. I'm a Dutch girl. My oma and opa immigrated from Holland, second generation Canadian. We're Dutch. But the Romany people were persecuted. The Romany people were cast out and made to go away. And there have been so many signs that my family on that side might actually be Romany that I'm getting my DNA tested to find out, okay, where is it that we come from, or at least I come from, what makes up my ancestry, where do I originate, and what pieces of information can my DNA tell me to fill in these gaps of this history of witchcraft I seem to come from that I didn't even
Oh my
know.
gosh, it's so exciting.
So exciting.
So exciting. I'm sure you'll be telling us about it on your Instagram stories at the very least.
I like to talk. You can always have me back. We've talked about multiple episodes.
We have talked about multiple episodes. I'm
So
sure Megan will be back. But let's wrap this up. One, when is season 4 launching?
January 14th, a week before the launch of my official witchy business brand.
Which is one of the brands that you were talking about. Are you going to give us a sneak peek as to what that might be now or no?
It's called Wild Apothecary, and it is all about mental health magic. And you've actually received a sneak peek because I've given you a small sample of a service that I want to offer through Wild Apothecary.
No, and honestly, I meant to do it last night. I didn't. It will happen tonight, though, I promise. I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited. Amazing. I love this. Okay, so Megan, obviously, before we go, what is your favorite coffee order?
I've always been a caramel macchiato person. I just got back from my favorite coffee shop here in Chilliwack, BC called Smoking Gun. They are award-winning. Like, they have been named one of the best coffee shops in BC, and they're right here, 5-minute walk away from where I live. I am blessed. So I love a caramel macchiato from Starbucks. I love a caramel macchiato from Smoking Gun. I also love my Nespresso. Live off of my Nespresso machine, possibly one of the best investments I ever made. I know it's not coffee, but one of the drinks I tried at Smoking Gun that's changed my life was the chai misto. And I've not been able to find one nearly as good as theirs, but theirs is amazing.
Oh, okay. I will be up in Chilliwack soon, so I will have to try it then.
You have to do a whole Smoking Gun visit because it is a beautiful place.
I'm sure that when I do a visit, we'll do another episode where we'll actually sit and have coffee together. Thank you so much for joining me today, Megan. I'm so excited for season 4 of the Tarot Reflections. I'm also excited to be ordering my hoodie today from 1 in 5 Apparel. I'm very excited more about that.
Good, because like I said, I launched before I was ready. I didn't even have shipping, like products to or materials to ship with. I did not expect orders on the first day. I did not expect 2 orders on the first day.
I know. I'm so excited.
Grabbed my nephew, ran to Staples, I bought a printer. I have a whole freaking printer in a box sitting beside me right now because I didn't have anything to print off shipping labels with.
Oh my gosh, hilarious. I love that.
I was not ready.
No, but it's going to be an exciting adventure and we'll be watching it on your Instagram. So check out in the show notes where you can find Megan and all of her amazing things that are happening. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. And we'll see you guys next time on Share a Latte. I want to express my gratitude for Megan for sharing her inspiring story with us. Just from the comforting warmth of the final sip of your favorite brew, Megan's resilience and commitment to reshaping the mental health narrative leaves us feeling energized and empowered. Remember, mental health is a journey, much like evolving flavors of your preferred coffee blend. Megan's story serves as a reminder that healing is a process and each step is a vital part of the overall experience. Until our next coffee chat, take care of your mental well-being, keep smiling, and keep enjoying the rich flavors of life. If today's episode warmed your heart, please hit that subscribe button and join me on future journeys. Enjoyed the chat today? Your thoughts and feedback mean the world to me, and they really help others find the magic in Share a Latte. Every story enriches our journey. Remember, you can turn your trials into triumphs and your scars into stars. Keep believing and keep chasing those dreams. This is Min taking her last sip from the Share a Latte podcast, where life happens and coffee helps.